I'm very pleased to be presenting this morning at the conference, and I'm proud to be the last presenter to kind of round out the morning. Just kind of my own personal reflections. I think of Mr. Jerry sharing his story about his daughter, really starting us off with connecting our hearts. We have Kevin that talked about our finances and also about the system. So looking that aspect, and I hope to talk about the mind component around patient safety and these systems. For this morning, I really have kind of like three main sections. The first is just to familiarize everyone with some of the key patient safety concepts and frameworks that we use when we look at focusing on our systems, then to kind of transition into what the safety risks and solutions are in our perioperative areas, and to provide some of the kind of root causes and risks to the systems where technology can really help. And then just to kind of end out the sessions to talk about supply chain, some of the safety issues that came up around our COVID-19 response, and just to give some of my insights on where we've been, where we are, and where we're going with the COVID-19. All right, so we'll start the session off with a polling question. And the question to the audience this morning is, how many steps are in the medication management system from patient admission through discharge? All right, so the answer is 11. And so this is a graphic. This is from an ASHP article, Preventing Medication Errors, that outlines 11 steps to the medication use process, starting with planning through selection and procurement, down to our physician that does the majority of the ordering and prescribing, through preparation, administration, monitoring, and then hopefully successfully sending the patient home. Why I like to usually start with this graphic is to help to start to begin to appreciate how complex the medication use system is. For every node along this graphic, there are a number of sub-processes. There's numerous individuals and team members involved independently within their role that all work together for each independent node on this graphic. And so when we start thinking about the potential for error that can occur through these systems, it almost becomes infinite. So we know that a system is looking at different parts that make up of a whole. They're all working together to some sort of end. When we look at systems within the healthcare, we look at usually groups of professionals that are working toward a certain purpose, following certain types of processes. And, you know, this topic of clinical microsystems is an important one. You might even heard of, oh, people are working within their silos. Well, those silos are really clinical microsystems. And we know that when we have a lot of those silos, that we increase the risk of error from occurring in organizations. And so really being able to work together within these systems to understand that changes in one system can impact another is very important. And so really the key point here is that we all need to be aware of how our systems function, how they interact, so that we can anticipate errors before they occur, which is a very important one. We don't want to wait until an error reaches a patient that causes harm, and then we're in a root cause analysis trying to figure out how we can make the system better. We have enough information in our systems now to help us to predict what may happen and to error-proof proactively. Another couple of two key concepts that I really try my best to share with my frontline staff is really this understanding that our healthcare system is not a simple one. A lot of times I will go into different meetings and maybe we've had a near miss event or an event that, may not have resulted in harm. Well, why can't we just change this? Oh, well, we just need to educate someone. We really try to simplify our systems that are actually very complex. They're complex in terms that they're dynamic. From a day-to-day basis, our admissions are changing, our surgery volumes are changing, and all of these changes impact the rest of the systems. We think that we can impose order upon these systems. So as much as I can give you this very nice graphic with these very distinct steps, the truth of the matter is they're happening concurrently. They might be happening out of order, and we're still able to achieve good outcomes for our patients, but we have to understand really how complex that it is. We know that there's never one single solution to any sort of safety issue or risk. It's really a combination of different safety solutions that we need to employ in order to best error-proof our systems. And so with having that variety of solutions, we need to have a diverse group of individuals as a part of that team looking at those processes. So we need nursing, we need the providers, we need our patients, quite honestly, to be a part of these teams to say, how can we make this better for everyone? And then the next key one is, if we have that understanding that our system is complex and that it's rapidly changing and dynamic, that we have to have a sense of resilience. And there's not a better, real life experience in terms of developing resilience is really around the COVID-19 response. The other one that comes to mind that's very important in healthcare is about goal conflicts, and really looking at the pressures that many of our departments have in terms of producing an outcome, producing our revenues, which are reflected in our, our admissions, our throughputs. And so while we want high performing teams and we're telling them, hey, we need to do this quicker, faster, more efficient, while we're telling them to be safe at the same time. And really, to truly be safe requires people to slow down, to take their time, to do the check and double checks. And so we have this issue of goal conflicts of one hand, we need to go faster, perform better, while we want you to be safe at the same time. And really those things don't exist very successfully. And so just being aware that every day our frontline staff have to make decisions between working faster and working safely. And that is something that we need to consider when we're developing our systems. I provide this next graphic just to really highlight a little bit about our inpatient, and that in our inpatient medication use process, we have our physicians that write the order, our pharmacist that looks at that order and reviews it, and then once they've reviewed it, they will release it for preparation and dispensing, so that the pharmacist serves a role in double checking the physician's work. Once the pharmacist has dispensed that medication to the nurse to administer it, the nurse is performing a check that then will double check what the pharmacist has done. So within the inpatient system, we have these safety checks throughout the process where we're all kind of looking out for one another. I saw in the video earlier on this morning of Lucian Leap, who it was really his landmark study that revealed potential errors and how they're caught through this process of the pharmacist and the nurse, everyone checking each other. As you can imagine, once an error goes past a nurse, that is the errors that are least often caught. So, the main thing to really realize is that most healthcare professionals go into healthcare because they want to help people. They are, and that they can cause errors, and these are committed, caring people, and they're doing what other competent, caring people do. I love this quote from Donald Berwick, because really, no one intends to go to work every day to harm a patient. So we need to understand that errors are inevitable and that error potential can be reduced by optimal design of our systems, looking at our procedures, our workflows, environments, and medical devices. So as we transition into the perioperative setting, we've got some clear statistics, and this is from the Pennsylvania Patient Safety Authority. They're a patient safety organization whose sole goal is really to look at error events and look at what we can do to prevent them in the future. And so over a calendar year, they were able to evaluate over 1,000 medication errors. Over half of them actually reached the patient. And, while this is specific to the perioperative setting, this is really the root cause of most breakdowns in systems really are around communication. And that's even just at the hospital level, where communication is the #1 reason for often errors and sentinel events. Other contributing factors within the perioperative setting, again, no surprise, will be improper handling of medications leading to mix-ups. Many times this is the number of look-alike and sound-alike medications that are within our supply chain, as well as accidental administration of high alert medications. So when we start to evaluate what the medication use system looks like in the, this should really be in the intraoperative setting, we have multiple medication use processes. For the surgeon, they often prescribe their medications via a preference card. And a preference card is really like a grocery list of drugs that they will need for that particular case. The nurse is usually responsible for pulling the medications off of this preference card. So it's not the pharmacist, it's really now the nurse that's dispensing it. The nurse then will often prepare certain syringes in the surgery suite in preparation for that case. And then we might have either the OR nurse or the surgeon doing some administration of medications. It might be, again, to that surgical site, maybe after they're, sewing up the surgery area, that again, medications may be administered by the surgeon. And then both monitoring assessments are done by both the surgeon or the OR nursing staff. In terms of purchasing and inventory management, really again, most of these medications would be stocked by the pharmacy department or the central supply. In our larger organizations, you might have a specific OR pharmacy, but in a lot of our smaller community hospitals, it's really the pharmacy just sending floor stock to the OR, and then the OR teams or our techs that are managing the medications from there. So certainly, that analogy of the OR being a black box for pharmacy, in many organizations, it truly is. For the anesthesia provider, this was actually something that I had learned probably just a few years ago, is that the anesthesia provider is really one of the only healthcare professionals that oversee prescribing, preparation, administration, and monitoring. So they oversee the entire med use process without any checks. And so, this is, a very important point to realize, that we have a individual as well-trained and experienced as they might be susceptible to causing an error, and there's no way to catch that in between. So for the anesthesia medication use process, in terms of prescribing, they usually have anesthesia trays that can have anywhere from 30 to 40 individual drugs within a tray, or a small case kit. The dispensing is typically from the pharmacy staff, or it might be from an automated dispensing machine, which, if you're not familiar, this is almost like a vending machine that has medications in it. As I had stated earlier, administration would be by the anesthesia provider, who many times are administering high alert medications, drugs that need to be mixed at certain concentrations for administration. So there's a lot of calculations and mental calculations that are usually ongoing during that administration process. And then again, monitoring assessment by the anesthesia provider. And then purchasing and inventory is basically the same. So as I mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about the brain component is really to bring up this topic of cognitive biases that really, for all of us, our brains can only take in and process so much information. And so cognitive biases are really one way that our brains helps us not to be overloaded with information. There's actually over 100 different types of cognitive biases. I have a couple of them on display on the screen for you that have been associated with medication events. So just really briefly, you know, an anchoring bias is really one where we give a lot of weight or reliance on initial information. So this could be getting information from a nurse or even reading something on the computer, and we automatically make a judgment about what we need to do next, which again, it can be very beneficial in a emergent, urgent situation, but also one that makes us susceptible to errors. The next one is confirmation bias, and this one happens a lot as well too, where we might know a patient very well, we kind of know everything about them, and so we tend to have a tunnel vision in terms of making decisions about a particular case. And although we might have a nurse or resident provide new information, it kind of gets ignored because we know our patient and we know what's best. So again, while these cognitive biases can be very helpful, they also put us at risk as well. In terms of cognitive biases, again, we're looking at the person, the patient, and the systems. For the person, it's really understanding that having a lot of information, so a lot of cognitive loading, so having to do manual calculations from concentrations to infusion rates can make someone susceptible to shortcuts in our brain, not being able to process all of that information, fatigue, as well as, you know, just being stressed out. For our patients, it could be having a patient that has a very complex presentation, a number of comorbidities, some of them we might be familiar with or not, and then perhaps just having a lack of complete history. And then again, you can see the large component of this is about our systems and focusing on our systems and all the risks that come with our systems. And so looking at our perioperative areas and some risks there, having inexperienced staff members for our patients, having the inability for our patients to respond to sedation and anesthesia. So if we forgot to ask them about an allergy, we certainly can't ask them if they're not able to answer. And then just the nature of high-risk patients with renal disease or renal disease or liver disease that changes how we would dose the patient and having to make those decisions sometimes in a very short time frame. When we look at the system in terms of perioperative risk factors, we're looking at our OR throughput. So again, production pressures are really important in our ORs. Medication use, lots of medications being used throughout that perioperative period. And of those medications, the majority of them are high risk. Just having that environment that's fast-paced, complex, dynamic, and unfortunately, we still have a lot of verbal orders that are provided in the perioperative setting. And then, as I mentioned, just a lack of redundancies where we benefit from that on the inpatient end. There's definitely a lack of redundancies in the perioperative setting. So as we look at designing safer systems, it's really, again, having a good understanding of those patient safety principles, as well as human factors engineering, which is taking into account those cognitive biases and designing our systems to help to guard against those cognitive biases. With those two things together, we can reduce the likelihood of error. We can make errors more apparent. So again, our goal is always to get to zero, but we have to acknowledge that errors can occur, and then when they do occur, to make them very obvious. And then we want to minimize any consequences of errors. So then when we look through the effectiveness of our error reduction strategies, you can now realize why telling an individual to be more careful or to be more vigilant is probably the least effective of all our different strategies. And as we work our way up the continuum, we look at automation, where our RFID technology works in, computerization with our EHR, having forcing functions and constraints, which is limiting sometimes the concentrations as well as our dosage forms that we're using in our individual settings. So when we look at safety technology in the perioperative setting, we can see that we have it employed kind of across the medication use system within the ORs, but we still see that there's a lot of opportunities. And so I think what excites me about really trying to leverage and our RFID technology is going even beyond, again, the anesthesia tray verification and looking at how this can be used with the administration and helping to have some sort of technology or redundancies within that administration component within our ORs, our suites. And as Kevin had mentioned earlier about our inventory management and drugs storage. Just wanted to touch a bit on drug shortage management as it continues to be a safety risk within our hospitals and many times impacts our perioperative services. When we really look at our drug shortage management, we have a team here at University of Chicago that meets once weekly to manage probably 30 plus drug shortages at any one time. And really, the three options they have is, again, looking at an alternative product, insourcing it, so making it ourselves, or outsourcing it, looking at a secondary compounder. So risks involved with choosing an alternative product is many times it may not be the same drug concentration that we are currently using. It might be a different dosage form. In terms of the clinical effectiveness, it may be a second or third line drug that we sometimes need to use. So that comes into play. It might have different storage requirements, whether it's stable at room temperature or the refrigerator, and then just in general, any ordering or monitoring requirements. Concerns in terms of insourcing it is just availability of raw materials and supplies, and sometimes depending on the scope of a drug shortage, we sometimes have induced drug shortages of drug materials and supplies, as many organizations look at insourcing as a resolution to a drug shortage. When we look at preparation, really looking at the IV room and looking at sterility and stability issues that may impact the decision to insource or to increase risks. Having the appropriate compounding facilities. Not all hospitals can perform high risk compounding, so this might limit their ability to insource that compounding to the facility. And then having those considerations on, do you have the best workforce? So kind of linking back to the pharmacy technician training, are they certified in sterile compounding, and do they maintain their competencies? For the outsourcing, looking at compounding pharmacies, both of them should be registered. There's some slight difference between a compounding pharmacy versus an outsourcing facility. And so it's really, again, on the organization to do their due diligence to ensure that these facilities are adhering to both government regulatory standards as well as engaging in safety practices. And then the other last thing is just international distribution consideration. So here we have had to source some medications from Canada. They do not have the same NDC code that we have here in the United States, and the barcode is slightly different. So that was something that we needed to contend with. How do we electronically tag this medication through our system? The other one, again, is even looking at the outsourcing facilities' response to quality and safety concerns. Again, we recently had a wrong concentration sent to our facility that we weren't aware of. And when we brought it to the company's attention, you know, it was less than type of response that we'd want from that organization in terms of addressing the issue. We have followed up with them and they are working in kind, but these are important things that pharmacy departments need to contend with. The other component related to technology is in terms of drug shortage management is the challenges with multiple interface databases. And so when we have to make a change to the system, it means changing our EHR, our barcodes, our automated dispensing machines, our smart infusion pumps. And as you can imagine, all of these databases are managed by humans. And so there's a safety risk even in making changes to our system to make sure that numbers are keyed in correctly and that those are double checked. There's usually a time lag for any changes. So as you can imagine, once we've made the change, we actually have to wait for the whole system to update in order for that data to go live in order for us to act on it. And so that becomes a challenge. And really employing any sort of technology or changes to technologies, one of my key steps is really making sure that we're doing proactive safety assessments, which is really walking through every step of that new technology and really getting understanding for what are some potential errors that may occur and what do we want to put in place to help to prevent any errors from occurring. And then the last one is communication of changes. I think this is the most challenging for our drug shortage team, number one, and how do you communicate out to, up to hundreds to thousands of frontline staff, the number one, that we have a drug shortage, that maybe there's a significant change, whether it's a change in concentration, and then what is to occur. And then once that drug shortage is resolved, then getting the word back out that, hey, we're going back to our previous product. And so those are all really important components. So just transitioning into the last few slides here is looking at our COVID-19 response at UCM. I would say that when we started, like a lot of organizations, we cohorted our patients in terms of safety. We weren't just thinking about the safety of our patients, but also of our healthcare providers. And so there was a lot of risks within our systems in terms of rapidly changing drug regimens and dosing criteria, compounding of medications that we perhaps didn't compound in the past. And this is even down to old-fashioned making up oral solutions, having to manage both IRB versus non-IRB drug therapies to patients, and even some patients transitioning between those two therapies in of themselves, deployment of extra automated dispensing machines to help meet the demand. Specifically looking at our drug supply and shortages, we contended with an albuterol inhaler shortage, which required us to go to a common canister protocol, which we ended up sharing those canisters among patients. I think the one that was most critical was with our paralytic agents, that we had to make a switch over. And then interestingly enough, our IV administration sets. All right, for today, most of our COVID-19 patient management really has normalized. We have strict COVID-19 prevention strategies for our hospital staff. We have 2 active vaccine trials that are underway, and so we're very much on our way. In terms of where we're going, obviously everyone's focused on vaccines. We're really expecting several vaccines to be approved and distributed within a short time frame. What we know right now is that there might be different types of shipment, storage requirements between refrigerator and freezers, which for a lot of organizations, we probably don't have capacity with freezer space at this time. For administration, I think the key one would be whether we have a single dose vaccine versus our serial administration, and how do we remind individuals to come back for that second vaccine. And then lastly, just to wrap it up, is what's most important is our vaccine uptake and how we work with our employees as well as our vulnerable populations on the safety of these vaccines so that they will actually take them. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time this morning.